Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into the source material to understand one of the most transformative conflicts of the 20th century, the Six-Day War. So, here's the central question we're tackling. How did a region that was, tense, but more or less stable, just completely blow up in under a month? We're going to unpack the lightning-fast series of events that lit the fuse for a war that redrew the map of the Middle East. I mean, just look at this timeline for a second. The speed is just staggering. On May 16th, troops are on the move. Less than a week later, a vital shipping lane is shut down. And by June 5th, it's all-out war. It's a crazy fast escalation. So how on earth did we get here? To really get it, we've got to rewind a bit, back to the decade before the war. The 1956 Suez Crisis had ended, sure, but it didn't really fix anything. It basically just hit the pause button on all the underlying tensions. And what you had during this time was a real tale of two borders. On one hand, the border with Egypt was actually pretty calm. Why? Because you had UN peacekeepers there acting as a buffer. But the border with Syria? Totally different story. It was a constant powder keg, just endless clashes over land and water. So it really boiled down to three main flashpoints. You had constant arguments over who could farm the land in these so-called demilitarized zones. Then there was the literal war over water, a fight for control of the Jordan River. And all the while, you had these persistent guerrilla raids coming across the border, a lot of them backed by Syria. And this quote, wow, it's from Moshe Dayan himself, years later, and it kind of pulls back the curtain. He's saying that Israeli policy wasn't just to sit back and react. It was to actively provoke these little clashes, to slowly, piece by piece, take more control of the territory. So you can see how that would just keep feeding the fire. Okay, so you've got this simmering pot of tension. Now let's look at how it started to boil over. In the year right before the war, a few of these small fires on the border turned into major infernos. One of the biggest moments was something called the Seimu incident. So a landmine goes off, and in response, Israel launches this massive military operation. But here's the twist. They don't hit Syria, where a lot of the attacks were coming from. They hit a village in Jordan. And we're not talking a small raid. We're talking thousands of soldiers. The scale was just way beyond anything anyone expected. And the fallout from this was huge. See, Jordan's King Hussein had been kind of quietly working with Israel to keep the border calm, so he felt totally betrayed. And publicly, he got hammered by other Arab leaders for looking weak. It put him in a terrible spot and really ramped up the pressure on Egypt's President Nasser to step up and show some pan-Arab strength. Then, just a couple months later, it happens again. And it all started with something that was frankly pretty common. Syrian soldiers shooting at an Israeli tractor. But this time, it just didn't stop. It spiraled and spiraled until suddenly you have a full-blown dogfight in the skies. And the outcome was a total Israeli victory. They shot down 6 Syrian jets. And then, to really rub it in, the Israeli pilots flew over the Syrian capital, Damascus. It was a massive humiliation for Syria, and it got their main ally, the Soviet Union, to sit up and take notice. Okay, this is the part where the road to war gets incredibly narrow, and the whole thing, believe it or not, gets kicked off by a piece of really bad intelligence. The Soviets tell Egypt that Israel is gathering a huge army to invade Syria. Now, this wasn't true. The UN even checked and said it wasn't true, but it didn't matter. Nasser, Egypt's president, felt his credibility was on the line, he had a defense pact with Syria, and he believed he had to make a move. And he makes 3 huge moves. Bam, bam, bam. First, he sends about 100,000 troops into the Sinai right up to Israel's border. Then, he tells the UN peacekeepers, the very guys who'd been keeping things cool for a decade, to pack up and leave. And then he makes the final move. He closes the Straits of Tiran. Now, this is absolutely crucial. For 10 years, Israel had made its position crystal clear to the entire world. Closing the straits would be seen as an act of war. It was their red line, and Nasser just stepped right over it. And you have to understand, this wasn't just symbolic. This was an economic chokehold. We're talking about the route for nearly 90% of Israel's oil. From their perspective, their country's very lifeline was being cut off.
So the blockade is in place. The whole world is watching. There are some last-ditch efforts at diplomacy, but they're going nowhere. And meanwhile, the military pieces are locking into position. War feels pretty much inevitable at this point.
Those last few days are just a whirlwind. On May 30th, Jordan's King Hussein joins the alliance with Egypt. 2 days later, Israel forms an emergency government and brings in the famous General Moshe Dayan to be defense minister. And then, on June 4th, the Israeli cabinet meets in secret and makes the fateful decision to strike first.
All the while, the public rhetoric is just reaching a fever pitch. You have leaders like Nasser saying things like this, which, if you're in Israel, sounds like they're getting ready for a war of annihilation.
But here's where it gets complicated. Decades go by, archives open up, people start talking, and a new debate begins. Was this war really unavoidable? So you end up with two really different ways of looking at it. The argument for self-defense is pretty strong, right? The blockade, the armies on the border, the threatening language, it all looks like an existential threat. But then you have this counter-argument, sometimes from the actual Israeli generals involved, saying, you know what? The Egyptian army wasn't actually set up to invade us. The threat wasn't immediate. And what's so amazing is that you can see this division inside the Israeli leadership itself. You've got future Prime Minister Menachem Begin saying, flat out, we decided to attack him. But then you have Isaac Rabin, who was the head of the military, saying years later, I don't think Nasser actually wanted a war. The fact that they couldn't even agree shows you just how complex this all was. And that really leaves us with the core question that historians still debate. Was this a necessary preemptive strike to save the country from destruction? Or was it the final tragic domino to fall in a chain reaction of bluffs, miscalculations, and provocations that just spun completely out of control? That's the puzzle at the heart of the Six-Day War.